Hey, Parent Church Campus online family, so glad you're joining us today. This is not a green screen in the background. I'm actually here in Florida with our creative teams. We're attending the Experience Conference. It's a worship conference. We're getting fired up. We're getting education. We're getting to connect with people that are like-minded, which is kind of what we're talking about today. How do you navigate a culture when people around you maybe don't think the same way you do? There's other times that they totally agree with you, but what happens when your job or things that are being asked of you don't align with your faith, with your values? Also, there is a big announcement at the end of the service Pastor Dan's going to be giving. So excited for you guys to be hearing about that. Welcome to church.
The Lord is my shepherd, and He is everything I need, so I will not worry, I will not fear the enemy. He said that He loves me, He said that He's with me, even though I walk through the valley of shadow and death, and still I know He has good plans. He has good plans for me. So I will take heart in deserts and gardens. He has good plans. He has good plans for me. If I know my Father, I know my Father has good plans for me. The Lord is my Savior, so why should I doubt my victory? Why would I question this rod and the staff that comforts me? He quiets the waters, He quiets the storm inside of me. So what could be better than walking with Him when I believe He has good plans? He has good plans for me. So I will take heart in deserts and gardens. He has good plans. He has good plans for me. If I know my Father, I know my Father has. He has good plans. He has good plans for me. So I will take heart in deserts and gardens. He has good plans. He has good plans for me. If I know my Father, I know my Father has good plans for me. Good plans for me. And surely goodness and mercy will follow after me. So fear will not find me, 'cause I'll be dwelling in the house of God. Surely your goodness and mercy will follow after me. So fear will not find me, 'cause I'll be dwelling in the house of God. Surely your goodness and mercy will follow after me. So fear will not find me, 'cause I'll be dwelling in the house of God. And surely your goodness and mercy will follow after me. So fear If I know my Father, I know my Father has. If I know my Father, I know my Father has.
As U.S. inflation hits an all-time high.
They destroyed store windows in Soho and lit fires during another night of violent protest.
The Supreme Court has now overturned Roe v. Wade.
Welcome, everybody, to our online campus. For those of you joining us around the world, thank you for taking time to grow with us today. Everybody in America and the state of Arizona, thank you for hanging out with us today as well. Crossroads Recovery, guys, we love you so much. So excited about your growth in Christ and your victory that you're finding. And just to be a big shout out to Todd and David Bryan. I pray you're having a great day over there as well. So we started a brand new series last weekend, Where Do I Stand? And this whole idea came when I was watching the Olympics, the opening ceremonies of the Olympics. And for those of you who watched that, if you're flat out in love with Jesus, there were some moments that you were in horror and shock as I saw in my face anti-biblical values, how they were portrayed. And then came that whole Last Supper moment. And I was angry and I was heartbroken all at the same time. And I waited to talk about this because I didn't want to talk about it in the moment. I knew the series was coming. And I just want to say this today. Now's the time. I want to share with you some thoughts today. And here's the heartbeat behind this. The Apostle Paul, he's speaking about the role of pastors and teachers. And he says this to his friends in Ephesus, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 12. He says, their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and to build up the church, the body of Christ. So my heartbeat today is to equip you, to encourage you, to challenge you in a lot of ways as you live in kind of a world that has just gone so far away from God's values, from a biblical worldview. And I just want to tell you right up front, you are all going to have an opportunity today to be upset with me. I'm going to push on so many different things from so many different angles, and there's going to be an opportunity for everybody to have a moment where you're just a little bit upset. You're going to be maybe mad that I wasn't bold enough on something, or I was too bold on something. You're just going to have that opportunity. So just prepare yourself. Remember, the Bible says you have to love me. So I've got that going for me. Let's get after it today. So I want to talk to you about how we are living in a modern day Babylon. Now, Babylon was known as the most godless, evil culture in history. That's what Babylon was. You say, well, how do I know that? Because there's been some pretty godless cultures, because the angels said so in the book of Revelation. If you read the book of Revelation, when the angels are told that Jesus is going to return, they cry out, fallen, fallen is Babylon. Now, understand this, Babylon has already been destroyed from what we know as ancient Babylon. It's been destroyed. And yet the angels don't cry out, fallen, fallen is Hamas, or ISIS, or the Nazis, or Sodom and Gomorrah even. They cry out, fallen is Babylon. And if you haven't noticed, we're becoming a modern day Babylon. We are really post-Christian now in our culture. All of mainstream culture doesn't value our values when it comes to sex or marriage or gender or life, all of life. Even generosity in so many ways is looked down upon from a biblical worldview. If you tell people, well, I tithe, I give 10% to make a difference in the world, 10% to my church to make a difference, people look at you, you're crazy. When I get on an airplane and I sit next to a person and they finally find out that I'm a pastor, you would think I just said, pull my finger. I mean, literally, you would think that I just passed gas. I mean, I'm sorry, that's kind of rude and crass, but you'd think they just pull away from me. They lean away from me. They put in their headphones. They just want to tune me out. Now, the best book in the Bible on how to thrive in Babylon is actually the book of Daniel. And we're going to walk through Daniel chapter 1. We're going to go through the whole chapter today, and I think you're going to be so encouraged. Now, Daniel is an amazing adventure story. I challenge you to read the whole book this week. There's a dude that's thrown into a lion's den, and then 3 guys are thrown into a fiery furnace, and a king who goes wacko and becomes a wild animal for an entire year. It's an amazing story. And if you grew up in church, you grew up in Sunday school, it was a great adventure story. But Understand this today, the lessons of Daniel are not if you trust God that lions will suddenly go on a high carb diet and you won't be eaten, or that you can become fireproof and you won't be burned in a fiery furnace. And it's not just an adventure story. It's actually a guide, a primer on how to thrive in a totally godless environment. Now, Daniel was 16 years old when King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon besieged Jerusalem and captured it. He took a group of young men like Daniel and a group of women 900 miles back to his hometown. The women entered into his harem. And by the way, this is not in scripture, but it's all throughout history. Daniel was probably castrated. And that's what kings did when they had handsome young men and a harem. They would castrate them. I know it's brutal, it's pagan, it's intense. Also, when you read the first chapter of Daniel, there's the phrase, the chief of the prisoners. Actually, in the Hebrew language, original language of the Old Testament, this idea here is chief eunuch. So we're pretty sure that Daniel had to go through this. Okay, now that I have all the men's attention, I'm going to show you today 4 secrets on how we can live, how we can thrive, not just survive, but thrive in a Babylonian type culture that we find ourselves in today. So we're going to be in chapter 1. Let's get after this. Daniel chapter 1. Verses 1 through 2. Right up front, you're going to find out something so important. During the 3rd year of King Jehoiakim's reign in Judah, King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to Jerusalem and he besieged it. The Lord gave him victory over King Jehoiakim of Judah and permitted him to take some of the sacred objects from the temple, oh my goodness, of God. Now, Daniel in the first 2 verses unlocks the secret on how he did what he did, thought what he thought, and how he thrived in Babylon. And this is why he knew this. This is what Daniel knew deep in his heart. And he just told us this. And I skipped over this so many times. I wanted to get to the adventure story. Every time I read Daniel, I've missed this. But here's what he says. Here's what Daniel knows, that God's in control of who's in control. That's what he said. You say, where did he say that? Well, he said it here. The Lord gave Nebuchadnezzar victory. Daniel understood that Nebuchadnezzar was in God's hands. God was in control of who was in control. And then God permitted him, allowed him to take some of the sacred objects. So Daniel knows right up front, right from the jump. He's not saying that he liked this. He's not saying he even understood it. He just said, I knew from the very beginning that God did this, that God was in control. And because Daniel knew that God was in control of who's in control, Daniel was hopefully optimistic. And we're going to see this in his attitude. If you read through the book of Daniel this week, you're going to see his attitude was amazing. And this is important because I think so many of us today find ourselves living in a little bit of despair. Like we're overwhelmed by all the things that are going down around us. And I'll be honest with you, when I was watching the Olympics and watching the opening ceremony, I just got so depressed at just how far we've come away from God's values in our world today. And it's easy to feel like everything is going to hell in hyperdrive. But the problem is when that's our attitude, it's really hard to influence or impact the world around us. Because it's like, hey, we're on the losing team and we're really mad about it. Do you want to join us? Nobody wants to be a part of that. Now, hear me, it's okay to be discouraged at times. I mean, even the Apostle Paul talks about at times he struggled with depression and Jesus was troubled in his spirit. The problem begins when we're living like we ultimately are going to lose, that God doesn't win, that evil is going to win when we live like that. But here's the thing that you have to know. I've read the book of Revelation. I've read the last book of the Bible, and I've come to the very end, and here's a spoiler alert. If you haven't read it, God wins. We win. Now, imagine that I'm recording the upcoming, here in a couple months, the Rams-Cardinals game. All right, I'm the Los Angeles Rams, who are my team. I know, I'm sorry, Cardinals fans. And the Arizona Cardinals are playing. I'm recording it, right? Somebody before I leave church slips and tells me, of course, the Rams win, because that's what's going to happen, all right? Now, imagine I go home and I watch this recording. I sit down. I know that the Rams have won, but in the 3rd quarter, the Cardinals are just beating up on the Rams. They're just beating them. And I start to scream, lose my mind, throw things at the TV. My wife would come in, she'd look at me, Nicole would be like, what are you doing? Like, you already know who won the game. Why are you acting this way? It's kind of how we're acting these days. We're acting like ultimately we don't know that God wins. And when you know that God wins, it changes your heart. You start to pray for people who are broken, hurting. You start to love them at a whole different level, and we'll get to more of that later. Now, Look at this next thing we discover in Daniel chapter 1, verse 3. Watch this. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, or the chief of the prisoners, which is chief eunuch, what I was talking about earlier, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Daniel is the author here. He's so humble as well. We won't get into that, all right? Good-looking, strong. Anyway, make sure they are all well-versed in every branch of learning, that they are gifted with knowledge and good judgment and are suited to serve in the royal palace. Now watch this. Train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. He's like, I want you to take, in the next few years, I want you to train them in the culture, steep them, marinate them in the culture of Babylon. Take these Jewish men who served Yahweh and now saturate them in the Babylonian pagan culture. Do you know what that is? The Babylonian culture? That was astrology and the occult. That's right. They had to study astrology and the occult. Now watch this, verse 5. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then watch this, they would enter into the royal service. Now don't miss this. They've been taken 900 miles away from home, castrated, 3 years studying astrology and the occult, and after all of this humiliation, they now get to serve Nebuchadnezzar, the king who did this to them, and help make him successful. What would your attitude be? Mine wouldn't be real good. Oh, but it gets better. Verse 6. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen of all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them. Watch this. He changes their identity with Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach. And Azariah was called Abednego, or when I was growing up and my mom read it to me, it was to bed we go. All right, let's just move on from that. Now, Belteshazzar actually means, get this, Baal's prince. Like Daniel's name meant in Hebrew, God is my judge, holy name. Now he's named after a demon god, Baal's prince. Can you imagine that? But I want you to think about this for a second. And I know this may upset some of you listening today, but these men were changed by the culture, castrated, identities names changed. They were changed physically, emotionally, in some ways, probably mentally. And here's what was happening. Their image of God was being distorted and changed to a pagan culture. And I'm just going to say something kind of bold right now, and I want you to hang with me, but here's what breaks my heart in our culture today. This is what the enemy is doing to so many young people in our culture today. The enemy is causing a generation to doubt how God made them, to doubt their identity. And instead of yelling at the culture and yelling at those wrestling with the transgender issue, it should break our hearts that we're living in a time when young people are questioning and doubting that God made them male and female on purpose. He created them. There's an identity for them. And there's so much confusion in our world today. And I know so many Christians are so angry, we're so upset about this. It should break our hearts. And we should cry out for this generation because we have a hurting generation. I'm so proud of our youth ministry. Pastor Ryan and his team, they're actually going to be addressing this issue in our culture over the next few weeks in our youth ministry right here on our Glendale campus in Arizona. And I'm proud of them for boldly stepping in and saying, hey, you don't have to live in this confusion anymore. God made you on purpose. He made you perfect. He made you fearfully and wonderfully made. He loves you. And it's difficult. And this is what Daniel went through. This is the transformation that this king wanted to see in their lives. And I think that we have an enemy today who wants to see so many people confused about how God's made them and who he destined them to be. And I know that's hard to hear. We love you. If you're wrestling with your identity, know this. We're not here to condemn you. We're here to love you and to encourage you and to strengthen you and to remind you who God has made you to be. Now we're going to see another secret to thriving in Babylon. Daniel chapter 1, verse 5. Wisdom to pick his battles. This is what we see with Daniel. He had the wisdom to pick his battles. Now, first of all, did God say that you can't know about astrology or the occult? No, God never said that. Did he say that it was evil to practice that? He's like, yeah, I don't want you to practice that. Yes, don't practice that. So what would I do if I had to be put through all these years of these classes? I'd probably sat in the back, make spit wads, say this is stupid, roll my eyes at my neighbor. Some of you maybe have had to take some classes at your workplace that you didn't want to take. What was your attitude in the midst of that? Daniel had an amazing attitude. Daniel sat in the front row probably. He took notes. We know this. He graduated top of his class, which later gave him the ability to say to the king, I know this stuff better than all your magicians and all of your enchanters, and it's garbage. Let me tell you about God Most High. Let me tell you about Yahweh. And he couldn't have done that if he had skipped class and made fun and didn't learn. See, you can live like Daniel if you know that God is ultimately in control. Now, here's the third thing. Because if I just said to you, hey, you got to pick your battles wisely, you might say to me, Dan, that's kind of soft. But there's two sides to this coin. Here's the second side to this. The third secret to thriving in Babylon is this. Daniel had courage. So he didn't just pick his battles wisely. He had the courage to stand up for the truth. But courage has to be married to wisdom. All right? Courage for things that God has not asked you to be courageous about, that's just bravado. That's just machoism, all right, guys? Also, courage isn't liking something on social media or getting all your friends to agree and then posting some big statements about things. No. For the Jesus follower, courage is drawing the line where God draws the line. When God draws a line, we say, you know what? We're not going to cross that line. And God has drawn some lines. Now, that's what we're going to see with Daniel. He had courage that when he knew where God drew the line, he wasn't going to step over that line. Watch this in verse 8. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and the wine given to him by the king. He asked the chief of staff, the chief eunuch, for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods according to God's plan for the dietary reasons and dietary means for him as a Jewish man. Now, God had given the chief of staff both respect, I love that, and affection for Daniel. But he responded, I'm afraid of my king, the Lord my king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other young youths at your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded. Not a nice guy. Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water. Dear Lord in heaven. Daniel said, at the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's rich food, the king's food. Then make your decision in light of what you see. Let the evidence be your guide. The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his three friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. Here's what you got to see. Daniel only knew what he was taught by the priests growing up. Here's the problem with the teachers of the law and the priests when Daniel was growing up. They were absolutely godless. That's why God allowed Babylon to bring discipline to Jerusalem, to the southern kingdom of Israel. But even in the darkest spiritual moments in Israel's history, these young Jewish boys knew three things. Number one, boys have to be circumcised on the 8th day. All right. Number two, you don't bow down before an idol. They all knew that. You didn't worship an idol. And number three, your diet had to be kosher. God had a plan for how to eat. They all knew that. They knew where God had drawn some lines, and they said, we're not going to go across those lines, and we're willing to accept whatever consequences come our way. And at the end of 10 days, guess what? They were healthier than everybody that had been eating the other diet. Now, side note, I know a lot of people, the original diet, Daniel plan, I know a lot of people the first year like to do a Daniel diet plan. It's very popular in our world today. But originally, this diet plan was not for weight loss. I hate to break it to you. Matter of fact, in the Hebrew language, the original language of the Old Testament, it doesn't say the idea of healthier like we understand health today. It says they were fatter. Like they had put on weight. Like Daniel didn't suddenly get a six-pack abs. He gained 6 pounds, okay? In ancient times, you have to know this, and this is kind of cool, fat was fabulous. in ancient times. It was a sign of wealth and prosperity and health back in those days. The only people who had six-pack abs were the starving workers in that day. Just a side note real quick. My grandma Stephan, years ago, I was probably in my mid-20s. My brother was like 21. I was probably 25. And we were riding the car with my grandma. Now, my brother and I are totally different builds. Back then, I was actually about 60 pounds heavier than I am right now. I was at my heaviest weight. So I was probably about 285, 300 pounds. And my brother was very, very thin. He was in good shape, all right? And I was about 80 pounds overweight, or 100 pounds overweight. And we're driving along in the car, and my grandma, she looked at me, she looked at my brother, and she looked back at my brother, and she said, Paul, why can't you be healthy like your brother Dan? And my brother just looked at her like, what are you talking about? My grandma leaned forward, and my brother looked behind her head and said, she's the only woman in the world that thinks you're healthier than me right now, okay? So, all right, side note, the Daniel plan was not for losing weight, okay? Now, what I'm saying is we need the courage when God's spoken clearly to boldly know where to stand. When God says, here's the line, don't cross it, then take your stand at that line and don't cross it. So let me dive into this for a second. One more opportunity for people to be a little sideways with me today. Let me talk about voting for just a second. We're in a crazy time. Those of you around the world, you don't know as much about this. Well, maybe you do, but we're in a crazy season right now. Our elections, the last three or four cycles, have been absolutely nuts in our country. And so I just want to say this up front. When it comes to voting, and I'm approaching who I'm going to vote for in the upcoming election, no matter if it's a president all the way down, who I'm voting for, I just want you to know a couple things. First of all, I support candidates who support specifically my right, my religious liberty, my right to exercise my faith, who won't call my biblical worldview on marriage and gender and sexuality and family hate speech, who value all of life. And we're going to talk more about this in 2 weeks, and it's going to be a very intense weekend, and I promise I'm going to come with all the truth and love that the Bible offers, even life in the womb. Values all life. Now, our culture today wants to call us to vote based on a personality contest, not a policy contest. And I see this happening all around me. Now, I'll get to personality a little bit more in just a second, but when it comes to voting, I want to vote where God draws the line. I want to vote on what I see as my biblical world view. That's my conviction. Our culture wants us to focus on a personality contest. But I hear this all the time. You say, where do you get that from? Well, I hear it all the time. I hear people say this all the time. Well, I just love President Trump. He's so bold and he's so strong and he just says it like it is. Please don't vote for a person because you like how bold and they just say it like it is. What is that person's policies? Or Vice President Harris. Oh, she's just so nice and she's kind and she smiles and she's so full of joy and she's just more peaceful. I'm going to vote for her because she's just nice. Okay. And then I hear the opposite. I can't vote for Trump because he's mean. He has no character. I can't vote for Vice President Harris because she cackles and she laughs funny. Are you serious? Are we in fourth grade? Are we a bunch of little kids trying to make decisions? Or is this seriously about the future of our country and what kind of policies will we have to live with? Now, I know there's so many nuances to this. I know personalities can set the tone and the atmosphere for the country. And I get all that, but here's the problem I wrestle with that. Both sides stir up the anger. Both sides want to motivate us by fear and division and anger. So I'm at a place in my life where I'm going, I'm just going to pray. I'm going to read the policies. I'm going to read, what do they stand for? I'm not going to just listen to the news and what person is the nicest today or the meanest today or the boldest today. And then I'm going to think biblical worldview. Where has God drawn the line? And then I'm going to vote for those candidates as I read about their policies. And I want to challenge you, pray. Really read. Don't get caught up in all the emotionalism of this stuff today. And think biblical worldview and vote. That's my challenge to you. I know. Some of you are upset. The Bible says you have to love me. Probably upset you on both sides with that. That's my job. That's what I'm here to do. I want to encourage you to grow. I want you to think. Now, the fourth and final secret to thriving in Babylon, and this is so important that we end with this today. Respect. Respect. Even if they disagree with you, if people vote opposite of you, post opposite that you would post, if you get so frustrated, it all comes down to respect. Now watch this, Daniel chapter 1, verse 18. When the training period ordered by the king was completed, the chief of staff brought all the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service, and whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the other magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Daniel remained, watch this, in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. 70 years Daniel thrived in Babylon. And what you're going to find when you read Daniel's story this week is in every interaction, he was incredibly respectful to everyone. Everyone. Even the kings who treated him like they did when they captured him and brought him to Babylon. I think we've lost that in our culture today. We think to speak with respect means I'm affirming everything that people think or everything that people do. I tell people all the time, I may not agree with all of your positions on life and all that you think, but I will always respect you. And here's what I want to say to you, pure heart. Listen to me. Don't mistake my passion for people who are far from God as my acceptance of everything that people far from God do. Jesus loved everyone, and he didn't accept everything that everybody did. We can do this just like Jesus because his power lives in us. See, Jesus only spoke harshly to religious leaders. He never, and they were distorting his Father's heart. He never spoke harshly to sinners or to Romans or to the pagan culture. He didn't speak harshly to them. You can't impact your world if you're disrespectful. Those of you who are owners of a company or a manager at a company, have you ever promoted someone who looked down on you? You never have. No, you're not going to do that. Daniel didn't just serve in Nebuchadnezzar's administration. He kept getting promoted. And can I be extra real with you today? And don't get offended. Just hang in there. Some of us have faced persecution in our workplace, and we say we're getting persecuted because of our faith. But more often than not, we're being persecuted because we're being a jerk. We're treating people disrespectfully. We're not being salt and light. We're not being love and truth. We're not doing that. I had someone say to me recently that their rude behavior was that's just my culture. It's just the way God made me. No, don't blame God for your lack of the fruit of the Spirit. Don't do that. Don't do that. Here's one more. This will be fun. If I were to ask you, all right, how many of you are racist? Okay, just hang with me. How many of you are racist? Matter of fact, if someone said to you, I think you're racist, you'd probably, most of you, okay, would be really offended at that. You'd be really offended, like, no, I'm not. I'm not racist. And here's the thing. I don't know your heart. I don't know what's going on. That's between you and God. You work that out, you're prejudiced or you're racist. I don't know, okay? I don't know. But here's what I do know. All of us have been, I'm going to make up a word. Just hang with me. Gracist. All of us struggle at times with gracism. You may not struggle with racism, but we all struggle with gracism. Here's what gracism is. Gracism is we joyfully receive God's grace when we're broken and hurting, but we struggle to give God's grace to people we don't agree with. And I see this all the time in the kingdom of God these days. We, as John talked about last week, citizens of heaven, I watch us acting this way towards people we disagree with all the time. I see it on social media all the time, and it breaks my heart. How can we share Jesus with a hurting world with an attitude that says, hey, lost, broken, hurting people don't believe like me, I can't stand you. You're going to hell in a handbasket. We just keep pushing them away. You can't push them away if we're trying to reconcile them to Christ. Now watch this. God used Nebuchadnezzar for his purposes. We know that. Daniel talked about in the very beginning of this chapter. God allowed Nebuchadnezzar to do what he did. That God was in charge of who was in charge, all right? But one day, Nebuchadnezzar decides to stand on a wall in Babylon, looking out over his kingdom, and he says, is this not the great Babylon I have built with my power and my strength for my glory? And God in that moment just goes, I'm done with you. Mic drop. Your reign is over. And guess who gets to deliver the message to Nebuchadnezzar that he's about to go mentally ill and live like a wild animal for an entire year? You guessed it, Daniel. Daniel gets the privilege of telling the king, "Oh king, since you made that statement, here's what's going to happen." Now let me tell you how Pastor Dan would deliver this message. If I was in Daniel's shoes, here's how I would deliver this message to the king. Hey, Nebi, guess what, man? You're about to lose your mind. I've been praying about this for years. You're about to get yours, all right? I'm so thrilled at Daniel's response. Daniel didn't act like I would have acted. Here's what Daniel said. "Oh, my Lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies." Oh, king, what I'm about to tell you is so hard. Look at the respect in that. I wish this was happening to your enemy and not to you. No wonder Daniel was so respected and admired. And when the king came to see Daniel in the lion's den, remember this moment? You know, the king has to throw him in the lion's den. It's a long story. You have to read the book. It's so good. And the next morning, the king comes out because he loved Daniel to see if he was still alive. And what does Daniel say to the king? "Oh, king, live forever." "Oh, king, who had to almost take my life. God rescued me. Live forever." And some of you are like, "Well, that's Old Testament, you know." Okay, it's Old Testament. Yeah, and they were under dictators, and it was different. He had to act that way or they would have killed him. Okay, that's your thought. Let's go to the New Testament. Let's see what Peter has to say. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 12 through 14. Peter says this in the New Testament, "Be careful to live properly among your unbelieving neighbors. Then even if they accuse you of doing wrong, they will see your honorable behavior and they will give honor to God when he judges the world. For the Lord's sake, respect all human authority, whether the king as the head of the state or officials his appointed." That's right. Everybody in leadership has been appointed by God. Whether we like them or not, there's a reason that they are there. And you know the emperor he's talking about? The emperor he's talking about in this moment was Nero. Nero was a crazy man. Nero persecuted Christians. Nero blamed the Christians for the burning of Rome. Then he had their corpses lit on fire in his gardens when he would have orgies at night. This guy was a sick man. And yet, Peter says, honor and respect the king. He goes on, you don't like Peter's, let's listen to what Paul has to say. This is what Paul says. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 24, to a young leader, Timothy, says this, "A servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but must be kind to everyone. Be able to teach and be patient with difficult people. Gently instruct those who oppose the truth." Why should we do that? Perhaps God will change those people's hearts and they will learn the truth. Then they will come to their senses and escape from the devil's trap, for they have been held captive by him to do whatever he wants. He's like, stop looking at them as if they're out there trying to hurt you. Realize they are under the influence of the enemy and care about them. Pray for them. Be respectful to them. Be heartbroken for them. See, it breaks my heart that these days, one of the fastest ways to grow a church these days is to teach harshly and to mock people who you disagree with. There's a pastor locally who, I'm not going to get into it, but locally, it just broke my heart. He's really strong, comes out and says boldly, "I'm a Republican, I vote Republican." And this is what he said. He called Democrats Democrats. And everybody in the church cheered as he said it. It's easy these days to grow a church and gather Christians together rather than the lost and broken with this type of attitude. Now, the last 13 years, I've had the privilege of praying with our governors in the state of Arizona on the National Day of Prayer. I prayed with Governor Brewer, then I prayed with Governor Ducey for 8 straight years. They invited us on National Day of Prayer to pray. 2 years ago, I did not get invited by our current governor, and it bothered me. Our current governor, there's several of her values that I don't carry that are opposite of my convictions and where I believe God's drawn some lines. But later on that year, 2 years ago, I was invited to the 8th floor to her office with another group of people to talk about issues that were going on in our state. And so I respectfully went. And in that meeting, in that conversation, I got to talk about mental health and addiction, things I care deeply about in our city. And I made a statement to her staff and to the team that was there that day. I said, I don't always agree with Governor Hobbs, but here's what you will receive from me. Nothing but respect. When I talk about her in public, wherever I go, I will speak respectfully about her. You will not, never, ever, ever. If you ever hear somebody saying, I said something bad, come to me, because I am not going to do that. I will pray for her, I will honor her, and I will respect her. And guess who invited me, and along with about 8 other pastors, to pray on National Day of Prayer this year? Yeah, Governor Hobbs. And I was honored to go and sit with her and pray with her. We see things very differently at times, but I'm called to pray for her, to respect her. See, we're at a big crossroads in our culture today. I think the church is at a big crossroads on how we love, and I'm going to talk about this more in 2 weeks, and stand in the truth. How we love and stand in the truth. And it matters like never before. Now, at age 16 years of age, no one would have ever guessed that Daniel would become the Daniel that we know today. In Sunday school growing up, we used to sing songs, Dare to be a Daniel, Dare to stand alone. A Daniel who led 3 revivals in the most godless environment you could possibly imagine. And I want to say to you today, you have no idea the ripple effect of your life as you're willing to draw the lines where God draws the lines and stand there with love and respect and wisdom to know what hills to die on, and all the time remembering who's in control of who seems to be in control. You see, if we don't run God's play His way, we'll never see God's results. That's just the truth. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to share with you one of the biggest announcements we've ever had as a church. But before we do that, we never want to come to the end of a message without giving you the opportunity to make the most important decision of your life, to say yes to the love and leadership and the power of Jesus in your life today. So for some of you, for the first time, you're ready to say, Jesus, would you lead my life? I'm going to surrender my life to follow you. Others, you need to restart with Jesus today. You just need to say, Jesus, I've been doing my own thing, going my own way. Today, I want to come home to your love, to your forgiveness, to your strength. So if that's you today for the first time, or today's a rededication of your life to Christ, would you pray this with me right now? Lord Jesus, in this moment, I commit my life to you. I trust you with it all, Lord. Forgive me of my sin. You know what it is. I know what it is. No more games. I give you my life. Thank you for your forgiveness. Now, Jesus, would you fill me with your power? Fill me with your very presence. Fill me with your peace and your hope and your love and your joy. Fill me up, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. That's the most important decision you've ever made. We would love to walk with you and get to know you better and encourage you in your relationship with Christ. So please let us know that you made that decision today. Now, in the spirit of thriving in Babylon, I want to share with you a huge announcement for us as a church. About a year and a half, 2 years ago, a good friend of mine who does some consulting with churches and meets with teams and asks tough questions, sat down with me and a couple of our executive team members and just asked the question, do you think that Pure Heart has a unique enough vision that it should expand out across the valley, across the greater Phoenix area in greater ways? And I started really thinking about that. And I thought our passion for mental health, our passion for people dealing with addiction, and really our passion for people who are far from God and wanting to make evangelism and sharing Jesus with others a priority as a church. I just don't see that priority as much in the churches these days. And so I'm like, yeah, I really do believe that God has given us a message. He's given us a passion for people that I think needs to be spread out farther across our valley. So man, we started thinking and praying how that's going to work. And first of all, I want to tell you that we're super excited. Those of you at Crossroads understand this. We're meeting with the leadership at Crossroads. We're looking to launch in 2 more Crossroads locations. So we'll be streaming our services into probably after the first year, 3 locations for Crossroads. And then we're also working with the House of Refuge, an amazing ministry here in Central Phoenix area, and possibly starting a service there. So we're super excited about these satellite campuses we'll be able to launch. And then we're opening up a prison app. We're going to be joining a prison app. And so men and women who are in prisons across the country will be able to hear our messages every single week on this app. And we're going to be live on that app as well. So super excited about that. But that's not the biggest of news. So we started thinking about what would it look like for Pure Heart to expand across the greater Phoenix area in just a powerful, powerful way. And so I started thinking about a leadership talk I heard many, many years ago. It came into my mind. And this leader was talking about how he drew 3 boxes on a whiteboard. And one he labeled past, one he labeled present, the other labeled future. And he said, here's the problem in leadership. We sometimes spend too much time looking backwards at the past or all of our energy in the present, and we don't spend enough time thinking about the future. And what he was saying, and what I took in that moment, is sometimes in our leadership, we can live for today. We're not thinking about how we're going to pass things off to the next generation or prepare the next generation. And I started getting super convicted about that. I said, Lord, I know you've given us a unique message, and we need to take this message to have greater impact in our city. And then I started thinking about, let's do something bold for the next generation that they may never, ever, ever be able to do for themselves. So we have an amazing gentleman in our church who works with commercial real estate, and we had him look for land across our valley. Look for land. And he came back with 5 different properties. And the one that we landed on was an incredible deal. $4.6 million, I know that sounds like a lot of money, for 40 acres in North Surprise. It's at 163rd Avenue and Dynamite. This area is booming. There's 30,000 new home starts going in there right now. Pulte Homes on this property bordering the southern edge and the eastern edge is already building upwards of 700 homes right now. This area is exploding in growth. The fact that we got this land for $115,000 an acre is just unheard of. I talked to a friend of mine of a large church here in Phoenix that's bought lots of land, and they said, we've never purchased land at that price. So we're just praising God for this. And the other thing I want to tell you before I show you this property is we've already had 7 families in our church step up, and they've given almost a total of $1.1 million. So we already have $1.1 million of the 4.6. So let me show you a little video right now that will show you this land. Check this out. It's going to be an amazing piece of property. Now, we don't know when we're going to be able to build on that. Here's what I know right now. I'm convinced that God has told me, as a leader at Pure Heart, not to consume all of our resources for today, but to do something for the next generation. I may never get to see that land developed in my tenure as a senior pastor of Pure Heart. But here's what I know. The future generation that will be leading Pure Heart Church, they will never get 40 acres of land for $4.6 million. And so we're going to do something. We're going to go beyond our generation. We're going to do something. We're going to sow seeds into the next generation that's going to ripple on. Here's the thing. What do? How do we thrive in Babylon? Let's just keep taking more territory. Let's take the message of Jesus all across this city, and we are so excited about the future. 40 acres of land. It's a blank canvas that God can do amazing, amazing things on. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Simply this. We're not going to do a long, drawn-out campaign or anything like that. What's your best effort? Those of you who are currently giving, above your normal giving, above your normal tithe or your normal offerings, what's your best effort between now and the end of the year? This is only going to go through December 31st. And December 31st, that's it. We have to purchase the land. The money has to be available the middle of January. So between now and the end of the year, what's your best effort? What can you do? If you go to our website and you click on the Give tab, it'll scroll down. There'll be a section there to give specifically to land. That's what we've titled it, land. And give your best effort. And let's make a difference. I would love to see $4.6 million. That would be the dream for us. But the truth of the matter is, we need to get to at least 2.5. So we've already got $1.1 million. Help us out. And those of you watching around the world, you want to invest in what God's doing here in the greater Phoenix area, helping people with mental health issues, addiction issues, see families restored. You want to make a difference in a city one of the fastest growing cities in America, then invest with us for the next generation. It's going to be an amazing, amazing ride together. I can't wait to see what God is going to do. Or if you just want to write a check and mail it to us, make sure in the memo you put land so we know exactly where to designate that money. Thank you so much for being a part of this day. Please pray with us. Pray for God to move in a mighty way, and then we'll be able to purchase this land and make a difference for generations to come. Thank you for hanging out with us today. I pray you have a strong week.
Isn't that exciting? I got to go take that drone footage out there in the middle of that area, and it is such a place for opportunities. You see all these houses going up, all these things beginning to happen, the city moving out that way. And what I love about it is there isn't churches out there, that it's an unreached opportunity that Pure Heart is getting to lean into. And that's what I think is great about today's message is, what are the opportunities actually God's given us? It looks like sometimes we're being asked to do things that are against what our values are and where we're supposed to be. But I think that's actually a chance for us to have an opportunity to be a light, to be a testimony, to share what's going on with our life. Also, if you accepted Christ today, we are so excited for you. We would love to walk with you and give you some next steps. Go to pureheart.org/handraise. But as we were talking about that message of what do we do when we're confronted with things that don't match our values? Actually, on the other side of this camera is one of my amazing team members, works with me. He does a lot of our audio mixing. He does video capture. And so I want to, through the magic of editing, switch places with him so he can share what it's like, a time that he got to go through with exactly that situation. Here we go.
That's right, Pure Heart family. There was actually a time in my life when I really wanted to be a filmmaker. I went to college, I studied it all, and then I started working on film sets. The thing was, once I started working on film sets, I started to realize a lot of the films I'm working on don't have the same moral values that I really wanted to have in the jobs that I was working, the things I was doing with my life. And so what I did was I made the conscious decision to say, God, I choose you. I choose you over the thing that I wanted the most. But the thing was, God used that and he opened a door. God allowed me to work here at Pure Heart. You may have seen some of the awesome things that I've been able to be involved in. You may have seen me in worship today. And I get to do a lot of awesome things like that and help out with our online campus. And that's been the biggest blessing in my life. And so I hope that Dan's message maybe struck a chord with you today and allowed you to see that God has a bigger plan for your life than you could possibly imagine. And speaking of jobs and wonderful opportunities, we actually got to have a job fair on our campus where people got to come and meet hiring managers, find jobs, find opportunities. It was a great time. So go ahead, check out this video and see this awesome thing that we got to be a part of here at Pure Heart Church.
We believe that showing love to our community means caring not only for people's spiritual needs, but also for their physical well-being. One of the ways we got to demonstrate this was by co-hosting a recent job fair with Arizona Works at our Glendale campus. The event featured 24 employers, including Brushfire Tacos and Tapas. And we saw 165 job seekers in attendance. Crossroads Recovery was able to connect several individuals who are seeking work as they navigate the recovery journey. Many clients that are served by our LifeBridge at Pure Heart Research Center also attended. As a result of our very first job fair, 30 people were hired and numerous others began their interview process. This job fair is a wonderful example of living out our mission, not just giving a handout, but also a hand up. So thank you, Pure Heart family, for your generosity, which allows us to partner with like-minded organizations and better serve our community.
We get to be a part of just being a light to our community, being a part of helping them take that next step, that they're getting to come on a campus and go, wait a minute, I've never been to this church before. This might be a place that I could go attend or I could be a part of. I love that, us being the hands and feet of Christ to those who aren't just necessarily part of our church body, but the people that God cares deeply about. Speaking of which, we love you, Pure Heart family. We're so glad for each and every one of you that invests into the mission of Pure Heart. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for your giving. If you're looking to give into the mission of Pure Heart, you can do that through pureheart.org/give or in the Pure Heart app. Hey, as we started this brand new series, if you missed last week, Pastor John did an amazing job setting up Dan's message for today. Make sure you go back and click the link right below to see that message. And if you aren't subscribed to our channel, go ahead and make sure so you don't miss out. We love you guys and we'll see you next week.